It was supposed to be a simple road trip. I had been driving through rural Pennsylvania on my way to visit an old friend. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden light over the open fields. I had my music on, the windows down, and nothing but miles of road ahead of me. I was on a detour. Some roadwork had blocked the highway, so my GPS was recalculating, suggesting a shortcut through back roads. I didn't think much of it. I liked taking the scenic route anyway, but after an hour, the road narrowed, and the fields gave way to thick woods. The GPS signal dropped, and before I realized it, I was driving deeper into nowhere, surrounded by trees on all sides. The asphalt turned to gravel, then dirt, and finally, it felt like I was driving on nothing but roots and rocks. I tried to turn back, but there wasn't a good place to make a U-turn. The light was fading fast, and my unease grew with each passing minute. I pressed forward, hoping the road would lead to a town, or at least another highway. That's when I saw it. A small clearing up ahead. In the middle of it, an old barn with peeling red paint. Next to it, an old farmhouse, the kind you'd expect to be abandoned. But there was a single light on in one of the windows. I debated with myself. Should I stop and ask for directions, or just keep driving and hope to find a main road? Something told me to keep going, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I pulled over, cut the engine, and got out of the car. The evening air was heavy and still, not even the sound of insects. As I approached the house, I noticed a truck parked out front, rusted, with its tires half sunken into the earth. It didn't look like it had moved in years, but the light was still on. I knocked on the door, hoping for some friendly local who could point me back to civilization. The door creaked open a few inches, and a man stepped out, tall and broad, wearing dirty overalls and a worn baseball cap. His eyes were narrow, and his mouth pulled into a tight line. He looked me over like he was sizing me up. "Lost?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah, my GPS cut out and I'm trying to get back to the highway," I explained, forcing a smile to hide my nervousness. "Think you could give me directions?" He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his hand gripping the doorframe. After what felt like forever, he nodded slowly. "Sure, come on inside. We can get you a map." Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I should have just thanked him and left, but instead, I followed him inside. The house smelled musty, like damp wood and stale air. It was dark, the only light coming from an old lamp in the corner. The furniture was worn, and the walls were lined with hunting trophies, deer heads, antlers, and even a few stuffed birds. As I stepped further into the room, I noticed movement from the shadows. More people. 3 men and 1 woman sat around a wooden table, staring at me with blank expressions. They looked rough, like they'd been living hard lives in isolation. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that made you feel like you were a deer that had wandered into a lion's den. "You lost?" one of the men asked, echoing the words of the first guy. "Yeah, just looking for the highway," I said, my voice feeling too loud in the quiet room. The first man, the one who had opened the door, stood behind me now, and I felt boxed in. I glanced at the door, considering my options, but the way they were all looking at me made it clear that leaving wasn't going to be easy. "You're a long way from the highway," the woman said, still smiling. "Why don't you sit down, have a drink? We don't get many visitors around here." I shook my head. "Thanks, but I really should get back on the road before it gets too dark." The man behind me placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his fingers digging in just enough to make me understand that I wasn't leaving yet. "Stay a while," he said softly, but there was nothing gentle about the way he said it. "It's a dangerous place to be out after dark." My pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but I felt trapped. The men around the table were staring at me, their eyes cold, unreadable. Something was very wrong here. "I really should go," I said, trying to pull away from the man's grip. "Thanks for the offer, but—" The woman stood up suddenly, cutting me off. "We insist." That's when I saw it. The glint of a knife on the table, half hidden under a dirty rag. My breath caught in my throat, and I knew then that I had walked into something I couldn't talk my way out of. The man behind me squeezed my shoulder harder, and I winced from the pain. The others rose slowly from their chairs, closing in around me. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. There was no phone service, no one else around for miles, and I was completely outnumbered. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice shaky now. "Just tell me how to get back to the road, and I'll be on my way." The woman's smile faded, replaced by something far more sinister. "You ain't going nowhere, boy." I moved before I even realized what I was doing, jerking out of the man's grip and bolting for the door. I heard shouts behind me, the scrape of chairs, and the heavy thud of boots on the wooden floor as they chased me. My heart pounded in my chest as I threw the door open and sprinted toward my car. But they were faster. One of the men tackled me from behind, slamming me to the ground. Pain shot through my side as I hit the dirt, gasping for breath. I kicked and struggled, but two of them pinned me down, their hands rough and unforgiving. The woman stood over me now, her face calm, almost bored. "We don't like people snooping around here," she said, her voice cold. "You made a mistake coming this way." I fought harder, panic surging through me, but they held me down, their hands tightening around my arms and legs. One of them pulled out a length of rope, and I knew what was coming next. Suddenly, the distant rumble of a car engine echoed through the clearing. The group paused, their grip on me loosening slightly as they exchanged wary glances. "What's that?" one of the men muttered, looking toward the road. Before anyone could react, headlights pierced through the trees, illuminating the clearing. The engine grew louder, and then, out of nowhere, a large truck pulled up, its horn blaring. "Who the hell is that?" the woman snarled, eyes narrowing as the truck rolled to a stop just a few yards away. The doors flew open, and two men stepped out. They looked like hikers, backpacks, rugged clothes, the works. They glanced at me on the ground, tied up and surrounded by the group, and their faces hardened with realization. "What's going on here?" one of them demanded, his voice tense. The group around me tensed up, clearly not expecting this interruption. The woman's expression flickered with anger, but she quickly masked it, trying to appear calm. "Just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "Our friend here got lost and we were helping him out." The hiker didn't look convinced. "Doesn't look like he's being helped to me." The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel the group wavering. They were outnumbered now, and the hikers didn't seem like the kind of people to back down easily. One of the men near me cursed under his breath and reluctantly untied the rope around my wrists. "Get out of here," he muttered. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, and ran toward the hikers. As I passed the truck, I glanced back at the group standing in the doorway, their eyes filled with cold fury. "Let's go," one of the hikers said, nodding toward the road. "We'll take you to the nearest town." I nodded, too shaken to speak, and climbed into the truck. As we drove away, I looked back one last time at the farmhouse disappearing into the darkness. I knew I had barely escaped something terrible. I would never forget the faces of the people in that house, and I vowed never to take another detour again. The sun was setting as Ethan drove down the winding back roads of rural West Virginia. He had always loved exploring new places, venturing off the beaten path, but this time it felt different, eerily different. He had planned a quick trip to visit an old high school friend, Mason, who lived in a remote town nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. His GPS had stopped working an hour ago, leaving Ethan to rely on his instincts and a paper map he'd grabbed from a gas station earlier. But now, it was clear. He had made a wrong turn somewhere. The road had narrowed significantly, and the dense trees pressed in from both sides, casting long shadows that made it feel like the forest was swallowing him whole. Ethan glanced at his gas gauge. The needle hovered dangerously close to empty. Panic started to creep in, but he tried to stay calm. Just ahead, he spotted a dirt road veering off to the right. There was a weathered sign, half hidden by overgrown weeds, that read, "Elmswood Gas and Supplies, 3 miles." With no other option, Ethan turned onto the bumpy road, which snaked deeper into the woods. Every mile felt longer than the last, and his mind kept drifting to horror stories he'd heard about backwoods communities. Isolated, lawless places where outsiders weren't welcome. He pushed the thought aside, telling himself he was being paranoid. Finally, the trees parted, and he arrived at a clearing. The gas station was a dilapidated structure that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in decades. The pumps were ancient, rusted relics of a bygone era. An old, beat-up pickup truck sat on the side, its windows filthy and the tires flat. Ethan hesitated, but he was out of options. He parked the car and got out. As he approached the station, an old man with grizzled hair and a sunken face stepped out from behind the counter inside, moving slowly as if every bone in his body creaked. His pale eyes fixed on Ethan, and a shiver ran down Ethan's spine. "Need some gas?" the old man rasped, eyeing him suspiciously. "Yeah," Ethan replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm a little lost, trying to get to Copper Ridge." The old man grunted. "You're way off, boy. Copper Ridge is about 40 miles west, and the roads out here ain't too friendly after dark." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Can you at least point me in the right direction after I fill up?" The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he shuffled over to the pump, but as he did, Ethan noticed movement from the corner of his eye. A woman stood at the side of the building, half hidden in the shadows. She was watching him, her dark eyes glinting unnaturally in the fading light. She didn't smile or speak, just stood there, staring. The old man finished pumping the gas and returned to the counter inside the station. But as Ethan handed him a few bills, he noticed something odd. There were no other vehicles, no other signs of life around. The place seemed frozen in time, like a forgotten relic. "You'd better leave quick, son," the old man said under his breath as he handed back the change. "Ain't safe here when night falls." Before Ethan could ask what he meant, the woman from outside appeared in the doorway. She was younger than the old man, but her eyes were hollow, as if life had been drained out of her. "You should stay," she said softly. "It's dangerous out there. Real dangerous." Ethan glanced at her, then back at the old man, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. His gut screamed at him to leave, but he forced a polite smile. "Thanks, but I think I'll get back on the road." As he turned to leave, a loud thud echoed from the back of the station, followed by muffled whispers. Ethan froze. There was something, or someone, else back there. Without waiting to find out, he quickened his pace toward the car, his heart racing. He could feel eyes boring into his back, and the air felt thicker, like the entire clearing was pressing down on him. Ethan climbed into his car, started the engine, and hit the gas. The station quickly disappeared behind him, but as he sped down the road, something in his rearview mirror caught his eye. Figures, several of them, standing at the edge of the trees watching him. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The dirt road seemed longer now, winding endlessly through the forest. The trees loomed closer, and the darkness was swallowing the last remnants of daylight. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he tried to navigate the twists and turns. But after what felt like hours of driving, Ethan realized something horrifying. He was back at the gas station. It was impossible. He had driven straight the entire time, but there it was. The dilapidated building, the rusted pumps, and the same old truck sitting by the side. The woman was still standing there, staring at him, only now she wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the trees, silent and ghost-like. They were all watching, waiting. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized he was trapped. No matter which way he turned, the road always led him back here. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel in frustration and fear. He had no idea what these people wanted or how to escape. Suddenly, the figures began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they stepped closer to the car. The old man stood in front, his expression unreadable. Ethan threw the car into reverse, the tires kicking up dirt as he tried to back away. But the figures kept coming, their footsteps eerily synchronized, their faces expressionless. Ethan's mind raced. Was this some kind of twisted game? A trap he had unknowingly walked into? He had no time to think. As they closed in, he hit the gas pedal hard, speeding down the road once again, his heart racing with desperation. But no matter how far he drove, he knew deep down he would never escape. The road always led back to Elmswood. And as the darkness swallowed his car whole, he understood one terrifying truth. Sometimes, a wrong turn isn't just a mistake. It's a fate you can't escape. It was supposed to be a routine road trip, nothing out of the ordinary. Caleb and Emma were heading back from a weekend hiking trip, cruising down the interstate through the vast desert of Nevada. They'd left late, and by the time they were halfway home, the sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the road ahead blanketed in darkness. Caleb had always loved driving at night. Something about the quiet emptiness of the road calmed him. But that night, the silence felt different. The highway seemed endless, stretching into the void. With Emma dozing off in the passenger seat, Caleb realized they hadn't seen another car for miles. His GPS had lost signal hours ago, and now they were relying on intuition and highway signs to get home. That was when he noticed it, the low fuel light blinking on the dashboard. "Damn it," Caleb muttered under his breath, checking the dashboard again. He had been too focused on the drive to notice the tank running low. They needed gas soon. He slowed the car down, scanning for any signs of a town or gas station. About 10 minutes later, an old battered sign appeared on the side of the road, pointing down a narrow, unmarked exit. It read, "Dry Creek, 5 miles." Emma stirred awake as the car turned off the highway, the sudden change of direction pulling her from sleep. "Where are we?" she asked groggily, rubbing her eyes. "Fuel's low. Saw a sign for a place called Dry Creek. Should be close." The road grew rougher as they continued. The desert, vast and empty, was shrouded in darkness, making it hard to see beyond the faint beams of the headlights. It was too quiet. No sounds of crickets or even the usual hum of wind sweeping across the barren land. Just an unsettling silence. Finally, after a few miles of bumpy, desolate road, the outline of a small town appeared on the horizon. Dry Creek. It was an old, forgotten town that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The buildings were weathered, the windows boarded up, and the streets were completely empty. Not a single light flickered in any of the homes or shops. "This doesn't feel right," Emma whispered, a shiver running down her spine. Caleb nodded but pulled into what appeared to be a gas station at the edge of town. The pump looked old and rusted, barely functional, but it was their only option. He stepped out, the cold night air biting at his skin as he approached the pump. He half expected it not to work, but to his relief, the nozzle sputtered to life, slowly filling the tank. As he waited, Caleb scanned the darkened street. There was no movement, no sound, just the eerie stillness of the abandoned town. He could feel eyes on him, though he knew it was impossible. There was no one around, or so it seemed. Emma rolled down her window. "Hurry up, this place is giving me the creeps." "Almost done," Caleb said, glancing back at the town. His gut told him something was off. It felt like they had stumbled into a place time had forgotten. Just as the pump clicked, signaling the tank was full, Caleb heard a faint creak. He turned toward the noise and saw movement in one of the buildings. A shadow flickered past one of the boarded-up windows of a house across the street. "Did you see that?" Caleb asked, heart pounding. Emma sat up straighter. "See what?" Before Caleb could respond, the door of the gas station behind him slowly creaked open. A soft rustling sound emerged from inside. He felt a chill creep up his spine. For a moment he considered going inside to check it out, but something told him that was a terrible idea. "Get in the car," Emma said, her voice trembling. Caleb didn't argue. He quickly replaced the nozzle, jumped into the driver's seat, and started the car. The engine roared to life, but just as he began to pull away, they both saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the street, watching them. It was hard to make out in the dim light, but the figure looked wrong. Its limbs seemed too long, its body slightly hunched, and it just stood there, staring. "What the hell is that?" Emma whispered, fear evident in her voice. "I don't know," Caleb muttered, stepping harder on the gas. As they sped down the narrow road back toward the highway, Emma kept looking over her shoulder. "It's still there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't dare look back. His focus was on getting as far away from that place as possible. But as they drove, something even stranger happened. The road didn't seem to end. It twisted and turned, but no matter how far they went, the town of Dry Creek remained in their rearview mirror, just on the edge of their sight. It was like they were trapped in some kind of loop. "I don't understand," Caleb muttered, panic starting to creep into his voice. "We should have hit the highway by now." Emma gripped his arm. "Just keep going." They drove for what felt like hours, but no matter how fast they went, Dry Creek stayed behind them, never getting farther away. The figure from before seemed to multiply, shadows appearing along the side of the road, all watching, all waiting. Their grotesque shapes lurked just outside the reach of the headlights. "We have to stop!" Emma screamed, unable to hold back her fear anymore. "No!" Caleb shouted, but the car suddenly sputtered, the engine choking before completely dying. He tried the ignition again and again, but the car wouldn't start. "Caleb," Emma whispered, looking around. The shadows were closing in, creeping toward the car from all sides. The air felt heavy, and a strange hum filled their ears, growing louder with each second. Then, from the darkness, came a soft, raspy voice. "You shouldn't have come here." Caleb and Emma whipped around, but no one was there. The voice was all around them, echoing in the night. Slowly, shapes emerged from the shadows, figures twisted and distorted, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "Run!" Caleb screamed, grabbing Emma's hand. They bolted from the car, sprinting down the road, but it was no use. No matter how far they ran, the town stayed behind them. The figures followed, silent and relentless. They ran until their legs gave out, collapsing onto the dusty road, hearts pounding in their chests. And that's when they realized the horrifying truth. There was no escape. They had taken a wrong turn, and now they were part of Dry Creek, a place where the lost never leave.